Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Smart Girl Politics Podcast. I'm Teri Christoph, bringing you in the latest of what I call the isolation interviews. We're all stuck at home right now, and it'd be a good time to learn some new stuff. So I'm inviting people on who know a lot about things that I think my audience would be interested in. And the latest, very excited to have on Scott Walter. He is president of the Capital Research Center. Scott, how are you doing?
Great. Good to be here, Teri.
Glad to have you. I always like to ask. So I'm calling these isolation interviews, like I just said, so that I want to learn something new and trying to connect with people who have something interesting that they're doing. How are you faring during this crazy time of being at home and socially isolating, I guess. Maybe that's the word.
Well, I feel like I spend my whole day on phone calls.
Yeah.
But other than that, which doesn't feel as productive as regular work, but not too bad. I'm lucky. I'm out in the suburbs, so if I were in a little apartment in the city, I think I'd be not so happy.
That's true. And I know you don't live far from me, and it's been just wonderful driving around. I'm not that we're getting out doing much, but when you do have to get out and go to the store, having everything just the roads, which are never not crowded around where we are in Northern Virginia, it's pretty nice. I'm enjoying that part at least.
Yes, it's definitely odd.
So you sound like you're very busy, so you don't have a lot of time to pick up a new skill or a hobby. You're doing a lot of phone calls.
No, we are staying super busy because our mission is to investigate the left deeply and expose it widely. And the left lets no crisis go to waste. So
well, that is
very
kind
busy.
of their mantra, isn't it? So so you were just telling us a little bit about the goals of Capital Research Center. I'll have to admit you were a little bit newer to me in the past few months. I actually did write a little bit about something similar that I think we're going to get into. So you guys are a great resource for information. So maybe just, is there anything more that you can expound on about Capital Research Center? Just, maybe your origins, why you started and where you're at?
Sure. We started 30 some years ago, and with the idea of being a nonprofit watchdog, really. There was multiple issues. There was the fact that even then, 30 some years ago, big businesses were stupidly giving money to all kinds of left-wing groups, partly in hopes of, being the last one to be eaten by the alligator, to use Churchill's great line. And so we wanted to, we've always been in the business of following the money.
Gotcha. And
criticizing things like the Ford Foundation. Now, of course, Soros has opened society foundations, similar places. And as I say, initially, part of one of the things conservatives were trying to do is say, hey, you big businesses, what are you doing? Give money to these bad people who are just trying to destroy you.
So you're busy. If that's what you're trying to undertake, then you guys are quite busy, because following the money is, it always goes back to the same place. Anytime I've ever followed the money on various things, it always goes back to the Tides Foundation or, like you said, Soros.
Yes, Soros and Ford, I think, get the prizes for there's almost no left-wing effort on anything by any group that matters that doesn't get money from one or both Ford and Soros.
Gotcha. So there was one article in particular that you wrote in the last week or so that caught my interest because I think we're going to hear more about this. And if we harken back to the Iowa caucuses, there were some interesting things that happened there. When you unpack what was going on with that failed app, it starts uncovering this web. And that's what your article goes more in detail into. And it's called Democrats Began Politicizing Trump's Coronavirus Response Well Before Senate Gridlock. So your article starts with the recent kind of craziness that was in the House and Senate trying to get the relief/stimulus bill through, which was enraging for most people to watch. So maybe we want to start there and kind of go backwards of what, how we got to this point of all these special interests that need to be jammed in, and then all these groups that are kind of starting to run, politicizing what's going on, this national crisis, this national emergency.
No, exactly. And the first thing people should realize is one reason that the Democrats were pushing so hard for so many crazy things is precisely because their left-wing groups were already fully engaged in exploiting all this and making these enormous demands. And now to the point of it being crazy, it was politically foolish. It did not help the Democrats politically to be asking for so much and so intransigently. But what you need to understand is the political party is the face of the left, but the real left, the beating heart of the left, are the groups, the donors and the activist groups and the networks and networks of networks. They're the tail that wags the dog of what you see on Capitol Hill. So that's one reason that the legislation was so outrageous, is because they were making demands. And they also were trying to exploit it just on their own for fundraising purposes and political purposes, especially their hope of defeating President Trump and their hope of maintaining the House for their preferred political party. So you mentioned the Iowa caucus mess. If people remember, there was a little company or entity called Shadow, amusingly enough. Shadow is the one that created the technological disaster that happened for the Democrats in Iowa with the caucus. Now, Shadow, again, to show you what really matters here, it's the shadowy nonprofit world that explains all this. Shadow was actually a project of something called Acronym, which is a left-wing activist group. And they were the ones who actually, excuse me, they're a 501c4, technically speaking, kind of nonprofit. They are the ones who controlled Shadow, which did the crazy app thing. So there's always a nonprofit back room behind what you're seeing on your television or something. Now, Acronym has a super PAC affiliated with it that's called Pacronym. And that group is, as far as we've been able to tell, the very first ones that said, hey, we can exploit this coronavirus thing to try to hurt Trump. So they did a $5 million ad buy in swing states, of course, to try to use corona and the problems associated with it as a way to attack the president. And that's how it all got started.
And what's the interesting, well, there's many interesting facets to this, but one of them is you were saying that these are not technically Democrat organizations, but if you look at this web of organizations, it's all Hillary alumni, Obama, like it's very, very, I don't know if incestuous is the right word, but these are people that were big players in Democrat politics.
Exactly. It's a very small world. In the case of Pacronym, for instance, one of the leaders there is David Plouffe, who was one of the top strategists for Obama. So yes, it's a very small world, definitely.
So this is nothing new, obviously. Dark money is something that has been around politics for forever. These organizations that are behind this latest attempt to politicize the coronavirus crisis, they're not new players on the scene particularly, just maybe newer parts of this vast web?
Exactly. Exactly. Some of them newer than others. In the case of Acronym, it was just founded in 2017, so it's pretty recent. But there's another group that's mixed up in this politicizing of coronavirus, and that is something called Protect Our Care. And that's a beautiful example of the kind of thing I'm talking about, because Protect Our Care doesn't exist. That is to say, there's not a board of directors that controls it. It doesn't file the 990 IRS forms that my think tank has to file as a nonprofit, or that your normal regular 501c3s, C4s, and all that file. And that's because it's just a pop-up group, we call them, that's part of this gigantic dark money empire controlled by a for-profit company called Arabella Advisors. And their nonprofits, they have four little sort of in-house pet nonprofits that between them, run hundreds of groups like Protect Our Care. And by the way, Protect Our Care has both Elizabeth Warren and Hillary Clinton alumni in its leadership. But to give you a sense of the size of this, I bet not one listener in 100 of yours has heard of Arabella Advisors. But in 2018, the nonprofits that it runs took in $635 million.
Whoa.
That's 1 year, 2018.
Whoa. Yeah, and honestly, I had not heard of Arabella Advisors until right after the Iowa caucuses, because I did an article kind of just uncovering a little bit. It was all news to me. I had never heard of them. I am sort of trying to understand what their purpose is. They are some sort of, they manage other nonprofits, or it was a very strange idea to me how it all went back to them and what their job was to manage these other groups. It's so confusing. We need a big flow chart.
It is. I can do it pretty quick, though, just because we're the ones who first uncovered them.
Gotcha.
Needless to say, the Washington Post, the New York Times, how they didn't manage that. So the way I put it is, think of a pyramid. So at the apex of the pyramid, you've got the for-profit Arabella Advisors, LLC. It's a consultancy.
Okay.
And by the way, Americans should realize that when you hear somebody inside the Beltway say consultancy, run. Grab your wallet, run. But anyway, that's the for-profit consultancy. The next level of the pyramid are 4 nonprofits, 4 of them. 3 501c3s and 1 C4. Don't worry about what that means, but it matters legally and politically. Then under those 2 layers, you get the final base, the third layer. And that is over 340 groups, although you shouldn't even call them groups, entities, spectras that are things like Protect Our Care. Now, Protect Our Care before it decided to set up a coronavirus war room, was better known for just trying to defend Obamacare. But another one of those groups that you may have heard of and that's really evil and matters is Demand Justice. Demand Justice is the number one group attacking every Trump judge, every judicial nominee. And it's got millions of dollars, and it's run by Hillary Clinton's former campaign spokesman, Brian Fallon. But so the base is hundreds of groups like that. The middle is these 4 umbrella nonprofits that operate the hundreds of groups. And at the tip top is a for-profit that actually manages those 4 nonprofits.
Is that a setup that you've seen anywhere else where a for-profit runs all these nonprofits? Is that just something that happens in the nonprofit world? I've never seen it myself, but maybe you have.
Well, I have to give credit to Rick Berman of Berman & Company. As far as I know, the very first. He's a friend, and he's the first that I know of who ever came up with something similar to that. And he did it a little bit before Arabella started, but it is awfully rare. However, there's a very funny story connected to Demand Justice. So who does Demand Justice hate almost as much as it hates Trump? And that's Leonard Leo, the so-called judge whisperer, longtime Federalist Society leader who has assisted the administration in picking its judicial nominees. Now, just a 2 months ago, something like that, a couple of months ago, Leonard announced that he was going to reconfigure his own much smaller than $635 million a year operations so that it would precisely mimic Arabella Advisors, since they're the ones who are his great nemesis. And I'm proud to say his press release on this linked to our report on Arabella Advisors. And he even renamed his entity CRC. His for-profit that will be at the top of his pyramid is now called CRC Advisors, just to mimic the very name. And of course, part of the point of this is to make it harder the next time the Washington Post comes ready to spill thousands of words attacking him savagely for his dark money. It will be harder for them to pretend that he's doing anything different from what the people fighting him are doing.
Amazing. I like hearing that. Now, I think I was a little bit remiss maybe in not talking specifically about what dark money is in case anyone that's listening may not know exactly what that is. Can you kind of go into that and how it relates to nonprofits?
Sure. Of course, the real answer is that nobody knows what it means because the left loves it so much that somebody like me who follows this closely, I could give you 20 different examples of different types of things that they're willing to call dark money. But the term was invented in 2010 by the left, and it was specifically intended to refer to 501c4 groups, which are nonprofits, but they're able to be a little more political. They're legally allowed
Right.
to meddle in politics more than 501c3s, which are things like the Ford Foundation or the YMCA, and what you think of when you think of it as a nonprofit. So the C4s get involved in political fights, and like all 501c nonprofits, they don't have to reveal who their donors are. And that, of course, infuriates the left because the left wants to go and make miserable the life of anybody who would give money to support them.
Exactly.
So they want to have the SEIU thugs on your lawn at 5 o'clock in the morning with a bullhorn, waking you and your neighbors up and telling your neighbors that you eat small children for breakfast. So that's why they want to know the donors. And by the way, I'd be happy to introduce you to conservatives whose board members have had that happen to them. Exactly what I just said.
That's
so.
scary.
So we know they want to do that, and that's why it drives them crazy. So they call originally the C4 only, the 501c4 things only, dark money. And everybody pretty much agrees that is at least the main example of dark money. But really, anytime the left can't expose donors to that kind of humiliation, ridicule, and pressure, they'll call anything dark money where they can't get at the donors to harass them.
Right, and I can remember before Trump was elected, while Obama was still in office, I've worked in fundraising on and off over the years, many efforts by the left to try and get donor lists. I think of CEI was an example because they don't like CEI's competitive enterprise institutes stance on global warming, and they were trying to force them to release their donor list and things like that. So it's weird to me that the Democrats and the left decry dark money while sticking their hands out and grabbing gobs and gobs of dark money. So that's quite the juxtaposition there.
Well, the great Stan Evans, the best conservative wit of all time, said, if it weren't for double standards, the left would have no standards at all.
That pretty much sums it up right there. Now, I did want to talk a little bit. You mentioned that these ads that they're going to be running now that we're in the age of coronavirus, obviously the goal is to have Trump not be reelected. And who knows who's going to be elected in his place. Could be Biden, could be almost anybody at this point. And obviously they don't want to lose the House either. That would be pretty bad, although they're doing their best, it seems, to do that. They're targeting swing states. What is the messaging have you had a chance to see any of these ads that they're running? What is the messaging that they're using against President Trump?
Well, of course, they're always opportunistic in any way, but the gist of it just being that, a couple of things. One is just that he didn't do enough early enough. And then one of the new groups, again, a C4, dark money, called Fellow Americans, and run by a Hillary Clinton alum, Haley Arms. It is been pushing the false claim that Trump called the virus a hoax, which at this point pretty much everybody knows, is a nonsense.
Well, even
claim.
the Washington Post debunked that one, right?
Exactly. It's garbage. But again, keep in mind a lot of left wing stuff is just to fire up their base and to fundraise, right? So if I'm a lefty, I don't care whether that's a lie. And if I'm sending it to left wingers, I hope will give me $5 on, click $5 on their cell phones. Well, those fools won't know it's a lie. And, as I'm thinking, sitting there plotting my strategy, right?
Right.
By the way, Fellow Americans is one of those bipartisan groups that's not bipartisan. It's supposedly made up of disgruntled Republicans, and yet somehow it's run by a Hillary Clinton staffer. So
it's funny that way. I love those groups that come up with those interesting little tidbits with no evidence whatsoever that there's any former GOP people involved. Or the worst of the worst. I mean, I can think of a handful of former GOP people that would probably love to go do that, but that's insane. That's just, it's. I don't think the world can get any crazier, Scott. Do you? I mean, is it possible?
Probably not. Probably not. And although I can throw out one more group if you want to talk about truly deplorable Republicans.
Uh-oh. Yeah.
Do you remember the name Richard Painter?
It
He
is
was
familiar.
George W. Bush Justice Department. He was the ethics lawyer for the staff. So I was in the Bush administration, and
Okay.
he did my briefing, and then my entry briefing, my exit briefing. About here's the ethics rules for what you're allowed to do and not do, and all. And he now has gone off to what I call the Broctopus. That's to say, all the groups are mixed up with David
Gotcha.
Brock, who himself is a former conservative Republican, theoretically. And they use Richard Painter for some of their stuff now. I think he had to drop off some of the boards when he ran for Congress a year or two ago with great disaster, spectacular failure. But anyway, he tried. But anyway, that's one of the groups. American Bridge, which is one of the main groups in the
Mm-hmm.
broadcast world, is also on the coronavirus ad campaign attacks. And by the way, it gets money from two of the four Arabella nonprofits, hundreds of thousands of dollars, in fact, through the Arabella network.
That's crazy. And you know what kind of steams me though, when you're naming all these organizations, how they all use America in some form. A lot of them use that, and we know they don't really like America. They don't like to wear American pins. They don't like to have American flags at their events. So that just steams me. What is it? Just to throw people off, to throw everyday Americans off? Is that why we're doing it? Because we know that they're not really that pro-America.
That's a great point. I had never especially thought of that, but yes, you're 100% right. Although I think the real answer that they would tell you in very somber tones is that if we just let them take America over completely, then it would be a country you could love.
True. Right, right, right. Yeah. Well, that's not going to happen because we have people like you that are watching and making sure that everybody is made aware of what's going on, the real story there. And of course, you're not going to see it in the mainstream media. When you go and try and search Arabella advisors, it leads back to the Capital Research Center's webpage, and that's it.
Sadly, that's true. Although I will say the C4 of those four nonprofits Arabella runs, the C4 is something called the 1630 Fund, and it's pushing 200 million in an election cycle at this point, is what it by itself is roughly up to. And even Politico and the Washington Post have looked askance. The Post actually had a House editorial some weeks back going, totally predictable, right? It's like, well, dark money is this horrible thing that right wingers do, but now it's so bad that apparently even there's a left wing group doing it.
As if they didn't invent it.
Yes, so it's just breathtaking. But here's another funny thing. Another really bad group, Issue One, which is a campaign finance reform, and let me tell you, Teri, you should trust them to reform things, right? But
Oh, absolutely.
anyway. It's tightly aligned with the Democracy Alliance. The Democracy Alliance has pushed their donors to give money to it. That's the Soros donor cabal. They've pushed it for years. But anyway, Issue One tracks 501c4 money spent on political things per cycle. And in 2018, Issue One had to admit that there was more left-wing Democrat C4 money than right-wing Republican C4 money. So that was amusing.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Because isn't the Republicans are the party of the rich and the Democrats are the party of the richer? So they always have more money, right?
Another line I have not heard, but I intend to steal it.
Yes, I don't. I remember that from like 2008. I don't remember what it was, who said it, but yeah, And it's actually obviously when the numbers that you're throwing out are pretty startling, the amount of money that's being put into defeating Trump. Not surprising, but startling, and also startling in the fact that it's just so. It's just all the Hillarys, like it's the people that you wished were going to go away. All of her staffers and Obama staffers are involved. So there's obviously it's obviously going to be a crazier year. So, what is Capital Research Center? What are you going to keep on top of this? What do you expect your 2020 to look like?
Oh yes, as I have been doing, all of us at CRC of Capital Research have been doing more media in the first 3 months of this year than we probably did in the last 6 months, because
Great.
all this just heats up all the more. Oh, I should tell your listeners, by the way, just to repeat, we have an online encyclopedia of all these donors, activists, lefty groups, dark money entities. Influencewatch.org. Influencewatch.org. That's the one to that needs to be used to find all this information, because I know it's hard to. I have a hard time keeping it all straight.
No, I'm impressed with how much you know, having all those. I'm writing it down right now, by the way. .org. All those organizations, because there's just so many and they sound so similar, and that's crazy. So your website then is capitalresearch.org, is that correct?
Yes, that's the main site.
And is that the best way that people want to follow along if they're interested? Because it's going to be an issue. Obviously, a lot of money is going to be spent to defeat Trump, to keep the Nancy Pelosi Speaker of the House. So what do you recommend are the best ways to follow these stories that may not be getting the coverage that they deserve?
Sure. Well, we have we're at Capital Research on Twitter, if folks want to follow that. And then we also have a Facebook page. You can find us on Facebook. And those have any major thing that we uncover is always there. If you go to capitalresearch.org, you can sign up for the weekly newsletter that has the highlights of the week's research. But I would really bookmark that influencewatch.org, because that is the entire encyclopedia of all this. Very user-friendly. It's set up like Wikipedia. So it's Wikipedia on the left is the way to think of it.
Gotcha. Okay. No, I'm like starring it. I'm doing asterisks around. I'm like, yeah, let's go find out that. Oh, I'm happy to know that you all are on top of it. Like I said, it's a kind of, you know that the dark money's out there, but trying to uncover what they're doing. I'm glad that you guys are out there doing that. And I really do appreciate your time, Scott. It's been really enlightening, and let's keep talking and see, what else you guys uncover next.
Absolutely. Love to be back.